everyone, welcome back to Cowabunga Corner. In this episode, we are sitting here with one of the most known writers in Ninja Turtle history, David Wise. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, you're welcome.
Now, you have been with the Ninja Turtles since the original cartoon series. You're the writer who gave us the first 5 wonderful, marvelous episodes that we all love and adore.
I am that person.
How did you get into writing?
When I was 16, I went to something called the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop, which was, it's still going to this day. It's a summer workshop. I don't know why they let me in when I was 16. I was not good. Nobody at 16 writes anything any good. My writing was terrible. But they let me in, and the teachers there were really like the top people, some of the top people in science fiction at the time, and I stank. So the next year, which was my senior year in school, I convinced them to let me have the whole year off and work on a novel, and I actually taught a couple of English courses, because here's what you have to do to become a writer. Basically what I spent more time doing than writing was reading. If you want to become a writer, you have to read everything you can get your hands on, read dull books, read interesting books, read boring books, read fiction, read nonfiction, read encyclopedias, because it's all stuff you need to be soaked in. I flew to England during spring vacation and met with, I was trying to meet with 2 directors. I only got to meet one. I had a meeting with Stanley Kubrick, but it got canceled. And I actually met with a British director named Ken Russell on the set of one of his films, and basically begged him to let me apprentice, because I was still sort of holding on to them. Well, this writing isn't working out very well. Maybe I should think about film again. And he said, sure, I'll call you when I do my next film. Well, he didn't do another film for 2.5 years. However, the film that he did do was called Tommy, which was the Who film. Ken Russell. I've been rewatching his films recently because he
watched that again recently.
Yeah, it's actually not my favorite Ken Russell film, but it's weird, and it has a lot of baked beans and chocolate. I didn't hear back. It was spring. I expected to hear something by the summer. I wasn't hearing anything. Okay, I went, I'm about to graduate from high school. I got to do something. So I went to Clarion again. This time, apparently, I got good because I sold 3 short stories professionally while I was at the workshop. And the writers of the workshop were no slouches. I went to another one the next year, and that was actually one too many, except that something good came out of it. But the writers were people like Theodore Sturgeon. If you don't know science fiction, you probably know the episode of Star Trek that he wrote, which I believe he wrote Amok Time is the title. It's the one where Spock has to mate. That was Theodore Sturgeon. Harlan Ellison, who wrote The City on the Edge of Forever episode of Star Trek, and who, big Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles fan, by the way.
Cool.
Of my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I don't think he's a big fan of the other one. People like that. And so suddenly I was like, oh, maybe I can be a writer. So I moved to LA. I spent a year writing short stories. It wasn't like I was making a lot of money or anything. Went to Clarion again. And a friend of mine who had been at Clarion all 3 times he was a Native American. His name was Russell Bates, a giant of a man, well over 6 feet, much over 6 feet, big guy. And he had been part of something called, I think it was the Bread Loaf Writers Workshop. He had worked somehow or other, he hadn't actually written for it, but he had worked on a series in the 60s called The Name of the Game, the story editor of which was Gene Coon. Gene Coon is to Star Trek what I am to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, what a guy named Bill Finger is to Batman. In other words, Bob Kane, Gene Roddenberry, those guys, they came up with the original idea, but Gene Coon and Bill Finger and guys like that were the guys who took the idea and actually made it into something good and something that people actually wanted to see. So Gene Coon was the producer of the first 2 seasons of Star Trek. So they were bringing Star Trek back as an animated series, and Russell had been pitching to Dorothy Fontana, the original story editor of Star Trek for the first 2 years, who was also story editing Star Trek the Animated Series, and he was getting nowhere. And he said, you know animation, and obviously at that point I knew something about writing, although I didn't know about screenwriting. He said, why don't we try to cook something up? And they're doing 2 seasons. They're doing a second season of it. They were doing a short, like a 6-episode second season. Oh, no, actually, wait a minute. No, we were on the first season. I'm sorry, that was the first season. He said, anyway, let's get together and cook up some ideas and pitch them to Dorothy. So we went, after Clarion, we went in to see we came back to LA, and we went to see Dorothy at the Filmation offices. Russell was pitching these ideas about mind parasites and very standard Star Trek ideas. And Dorothy kept shooting him down. And I was just sort of being quiet and listening and trying to get the lay of the land. But it was very obvious to me that Dorothy wanted a uniquely Native American story because Russell was a Native American. So we left the meeting going, okay, we'll cook up some ideas and we'll come back and pitch them. We went home and I said, Russell, we got to do an Indian story. Come on. She obviously, she wants it. No, she wants an American Indian story. But you're an American Indian. So how do we take Native American mythology and turn it into a Star Trek story? So we cooked up this, we were thinking there was a book that was very popular then, a crackpot book called Chariots of the Gods that said that, the crop circles and those weird paintings on the rocky plateaus of Peru and all that make no sense were actually like signs that an alien race had visited Earth in primitive times. I said, well, what if we take that and we'll have him look like, Quetzalcoatl, the Aztec feathered serpent god, and so he'll be alien looking, and he's sown all these seeds, and we started working on it, and I'm taking too much credit here. I take credit for pushing Russell in the idea of doing a Native American story, but it was really 50-50. And we cooked up a story about this alien who went around from planet to planet in primitive states and sowed the seeds of civilization and basically gave each planet a puzzle to work out that when they became sophisticated enough, they would figure out, it would trigger a signal, and he would come back, and they could worship him as a god and feel. And we wound up settling on Kukulkan, which was kind of the Mayans' version of Quetzalcoatl, again, the feathered serpent. And Dorothy liked it. We wrote the story outline, and then they were full, because we were very late in the process. They had no more slots, so it died. Until about 8 months later, when a guy from Filmation called up and said, we're doing 6 more Star Treks, and I saw your story outline, it's really good. I want you to come in and do the script. So Russell came back from Oklahoma, where he lived, and we wrote the script for the animated version of Star Trek called How Sharper Than a Serpent's Tooth. And we were there at the recording, and, we did it was voiced by Shatner and Nimoy and DeForest Kelley and Nichelle Nichols and the whole gang. Walter Koenig was not a character in it, but he actually wrote a script for it. That went on to be the episode that the Emmy judges saw. They didn't give out Emmys in the children's category for individual shows then. They gave them out for series. But that was the episode that won it the Best Children's Series Emmy, which is the only Emmy any version of the original Star Trek ever won. The original Star Trek, this blew me away and I only found it out recently. It never won for costumes or set design or not even special effects.
Wow.
Yeah, go figure. This was the only so that's how I got started.
What other series did you work on between Star Trek and Turtles?
Too many to mention, and many that you haven't heard of. The high points would be, well, there was a show called The Secrets of Isis. That was live action. That was Filmation. It's not a great accomplishment or anything, but actually people remember it, which just blows my mind. Actually, I wound up doing some cartoons, and then I wound up doing a fair amount of live action work. I wrote the Linda Carter Wonder Woman. Actually did a couple of scripts for them. Buck Rogers. I did the Space Vampire. I wrote for Quincy, that never got produced. So all these 70s shows, primetime shows, I did a fair amount of writing for. It wasn't as much fun as writing for cartoons. I'm just trying to think what I did. Hanna-Barbera did a reboot of Space Ghost and the Herculoids and all. I wrote for that. I did Tarzan for Filmation. Lots of stuff for Filmation. I'm sure there's something I'm leaving out, but it was the 70s. Who can remember? In the early 80s, I wrote for He-Man,
Awesome.
which is, here I go saying, writing primetime just wasn't interesting enough. He-Man was so boring to me to write for that I actually don't remember my episodes. Oh, I wrote for Smurfs. I wrote one episode of Smurfs. I wrote the sickest, most twisted episode of Smurfs ever written. I sort of have a knack for that. I also wrote an episode after, well, not after, there was almost no after the Turtles because it went on forever, but I wrote an episode of the original Batman the Animated Series that they killed for being too dark. And if that show kills us an episode for being too dark, it was dark. Yes. But the Smurfs episode was basically, I walked in, I said, let's put Hefty in drag. Hefty Smurf. For a whole show. He has to dress up as Smurfette because Smurfette's going off on a mission, and they had a baby. They had a baby in the series at that point, the Smurf baby. And I said, you know how babies go through that phase where they will cry unless, if anybody tries to hold them except their mother. They will only stop crying if their mother is holding them. The baby's going through that thing, and Smurfette has to leave, and nobody can make the baby stop crying, so they put Hefty Smurf in a blonde wig and one of Smurfette's little tight-fitting dresses. And he has to deal with the baby for a whole episode. And the producer went, "Ha, that's great. The network will kill it, but what the hell? Let's submit it." We submitted it, and the network came back. Their one note was, "Let's see more of Hefty in a dress." I was like, okay. And I wound up writing 14 episodes of the Generation 1 Transformers, which was that was more than anybody else wrote. And I did the origin story of Optimus Prime pretty much completely out of the blue. I didn't know if Optimus Prime actually had an origin story, and there wasn't a lot of coordination between the various writers. This is the thing in Transformers fandom. I'm sure it happens to some degree in Turtles too, but I mean, when you're doing a 65 episode show like the first Transformers was, you're just trying to get them done. Basically, you're not caring about, in episode 27, the Constructicons said that blah, 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 and this completely contradicts that. Whereas fans who had taped every episode and rewatched them obsessively and then got the DVDs and blah, 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 would actually notice stuff like that. But of course, the fans weren't the ones who were, buying the toys and were not the target audience. Well, they were when they were little. But so I did the origin story of Optimus Prime. I did a bunch of scripts that are, what does it say on my Wikipedia page, which apparently was started by a Transformers fan. Wrote some of the most controversial and memorable episodes of Generation 1 Transformers. So I did that. I also wrote the end of the Generation 1 Transformers, which was a 3-part mini-series called Rebirth, which basically kind of wrapped up the whole War of Cybertron. Excuse me. And but that was 2 years later. So I did that, and at the same time I was writing for My Little Pony and Gem. God, that was artistically fulfilling. It really doesn't get better than Gem. Actually, I had a Gem episode killed for being too adult. I basically had the Gem girls all going out on unchaperoned vacations with men, and it was a plot by the rival band the Misfits to make them miss the most important concert of the year, so they hired a bunch of male escorts to seduce and abandon them before anything happened. And the whole time I was writing it, I was like, and the way the process works in animation is, first you submit a premise. So you say Misfits, Miss Concert, hire a bunch of sidetrack Gem by hiring a bunch of male escorts to seduce and abandon them, and then you write a story outline, which is all the beats of the story, and Act 1 is going to be, first it starts with this, and then this happens. It's the sort of the skeleton of the script, and then you write the script. Well, I went through every one of those processes, and I turned in the script, and the story editor said to me, he said there was a sound of a single shot being fired and a fluttering of pages falling to the floor when they read the script. And I said, Roger, why? They approved the premise, they approved the story outline. all of this stuff was in there. Why did we bother? And he said, what do you care? You got paid. And I went, yeah, you're right. Screw it. Oh, and I did a zillion episodes of something called Defenders of the Earth, which Marvel did. So, and then that brings me up to when I got a call from Little Rudy Zamora, the son of Big Rudy Zamora. Big Rudy Zamora was a famous animation guy from Disney, and I think he'd worked for Warner Brothers, and he was an animator on a Charlie Brown Christmas and all this stuff. And his son was Little Rudy. And Little Rudy called me up and said, and I hope this is where you're going with your question, because I'm just taking it at this point.
Okay.
And said, very shy and embarrassed, this was in 1987, early spring. He said, are you interested in working for us? And I said, who are you? He said, Murakami Wolf Swenson. I said, you guys did, Murakami Wolf did The Point. I'm interested. What is it? And he says, well, we have this property that we're going to develop as an animated show, and it's about teenagers and he's really sounding very teenagers and mutants. And I said, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? And you could practically hear him pratfall over the phone as, you know, his chair went over backwards. And he said, you've heard of it? And I said, you know, dude, I have the first 5 issues of the comic. Yeah, I've heard of it. And he said, well, we're doing it as a TV show. I said, great. When do we start? And he said, you should meet with Fred, and we'll take it from there. So Fred took me out to a very lovely meal at the Sportsman's Lodge. And we started talking, and, you know, I had some ideas about how to, you know, to do it. Now, Fred had just come from Disney Animation, where he had basically gotten their entire operation up and running, the very same operation who would become his bitterest rival a few years later, which of course is hilarious. And he had done DuckTales for them. So I said to him, I said, this will either be the greatest thing ever or the worst bomb in the history of children's anime. It's either going to work or it isn't. And I can't tell you which, but I think it's going to work. He said, yeah, I think it's going to work. And so does this company Playmates, who's, you know, so it was basically about Playmates got the rights, and they said, we're going to do toys and we're going to do an animated series. So ultimately we were just sort of one of the, you know, tentacles on the Playmates octopus. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, how are you going to develop it? And I said, well, what I'm thinking is, you want a stet villain in an action adventure series. In other words, you want your villain who's usually is the villain in most episodes, the basic thing that the bad guys fighting. It helps if he has a personal involvement with the good guy, not the bad guys, or the good guys are fighting. And it helps if the good guys and the bad guy have, you know, a personal animus over something in particular. And I said, basically, I have this idea from looking at the comics. So when I do development, I like to use as much of the original material as possible. Mainly because I'm lazy. Which is why I can't take credit for April O'Neil, even though if it hadn't been for me, April O'Neil would still be, you know, Baxter Stockman's assistant in that one Mouser's comic that they originally appeared in. But I thought, oh, you know, and I didn't use her the way she appeared in the comic. I just thought, April O'Neil's a pretty good name. Let's use that. You know, but I said, basically, they live in the sewers. How are they going to get involved with all this stuff? They should be outcasts. They should sort of feel like, why should we help the human race? What have they done for us? Except yell at us every time we pop out of the sewers. So they need a liaison, and basically they need Lois Lane. So I said, so we'll give them, you know, a character who works in for a news organization, so that, you know, in those days when there was no the internets, there was no internet machine, so that she has a direct feed to, you know, suspicious stuff or something's happened, or, you know. And I said, but the main thing is we have to build up this kind of universe and give them a main foe to fight. And there's this character in the comics called the Shredder, who seems like the ideal supervillain for them to face, because he's, first of all, he looks kind of badass in a sort of chrome Darth Vader-y way. But also he's martial arts. So, and you can tell me, I can't remember, did Hamato Yoshi and Oroku Saki have a connection in the
Yes.
original? They did.
Yes,
Okay.
they did.
Yeah, because Shredder was like kind of the first bad guy.
Yeah, Shredder was. Splinter raised the Turtles to kill Shredder.
Right. It all comes back. Like I said, I tried to find my copies of the original comics. They are in a box somewhere next to the Lost Ark in my storage facility. But I thought, because it's martial arts and because there's sort of a connection, this is the guy we should go with. But how does a guy like this have an organization? He's got this Foot Clan, but, first of all, it's a kid's cartoon. We can't actually beat up real people. So, but if they were robots, we can wail on them with impunity. We can decapitate them. We can chop their arms off. We can do whatever we want because they're just machines. But where does a martial arts guy get machines? So I said, okay. And then I built this whole backstory that he had allied himself with this evil alien. But I went, okay, but the evil alien is going to be, who has all this technology that he can use and put, and create this martial arts super army and create this whole headquarters. And we decided it would be a mobile headquarters. And that's where I came up with the idea for the Technodrome. But I said, but we've got to hold this alien character at bay somehow, because otherwise he's going to turn into the main villain. And he doesn't really care about the Turtles. The Turtles are really just sort of an impediment, like the police, in his... Whereas, I knew I was going to build something up where Orokusaki and Hamato Yoshi, just hated each other. And so I came up with this idea. I love brains. There's an old horror movie called The Crawling Eye, which has this brain with a single eyeball and all these tentacles, and the brain from Planet Eros and all that. I thought, okay, what about a talking brain with eyes and a mouth and the tentacles?
You weren't inspired at all by the Utroms.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. I said, this should be the alien, but how does it... And then I saw the Utrons and I went, okay, he doesn't have the body the Utrons have. He's just a brain. So he's helpless. And that's why he needs Shredder. So now you have a symbiotic relationship. He needs Shredder because Shredder can actually, do stuff. And Shredder needs him because he can keep opening this portal and pulling in all sorts of weapons and technology and stuff he needs to build his robots and build his weapons and all that kind of stuff. And in the course of it, because I really liked the image when the Utroms all sit at the table and they open their coats and there's the aliens inside. I thought that was a great image. They wound up executing it differently. I did not write Krang's giant body as being Zippy the Pinhead, which is kind of what he looks like. I just said it was a robotic body, that it was an android body. They probably did the right thing in doing that. It certainly was funny. It was certainly in keeping with the tone. And
it's an iconic character now. Everyone wants the body toy. That's one of the rare ones.
Yep. I have one. Still mint on the card. The last piece of kind of the fitting all the puzzle together was, what's the deal between Splinter and Shredder? And I had a real problem with the origin story in the comic. Because in the comic, here's this rat in a cage watching this guy practice martial arts. And you keep seeing the rat doing, the crane pose and stuff, which is physically completely impossible for a rat to do. And I thought, what if he's not a rat who becomes human? What if he's another sensei? Or another, he's another martial arts guy who gets turned into a rat. So that gave birth to the idea of the mutagen that basically fuses your genetic structure with the genes of whatever your molecules you're carrying around on you from whatever you've most recently been in contact. So for most of us, I might turn into a Michele David mutant. But for dog lovers, they would turn into humanoid dogs, and it was the perfect setup because Splinter was in the sewers. And there are rats in the sewers, and he's off doing something and dealing with his pet rats. And he picks up the rat DNA and turns into a humanoid rat. And the Turtles, who had been with Splinter, picked up the human DNA and turned into humanoid turtles. And also I knew that this would be something we could use to create any kind of freaking mutant we wanted, because Shredder knows how it works, and all he's got to do is put the two characters in. We did this time and time again, and to the point where Bebop and Rocksteady, you know, in one of my stories actually said another mutant story when he's, you know, got, you know, I don't know, a cow and a Saint Bernard or something together. It's another mutant story. Isn't everybody sick of those? But I knew it would be a good, you know, it's always where do the stories come from. Somebody, it may have been Joss Whedon, but somebody said a pilot is like a Trojan horse, in that you're selling the basic idea, the concept, but inside, hidden away, are all the weird things you know you're going to want to do down the line. And that was the case very much with Turtles.
After the first 5, where there was other writers involved and stuff, how did they come up with the storyline to where each writer knew? Was there somebody at the studio giving you guys assignments, or were you coming up with the stories? And
depends. The next 8 episodes was another sort of linking story, if you recall. There's something, I forget.
Aliens.
They're trying to put a crystal back together or something like that.
Shrinking turtles, plants.
Yeah. But there was a through line. They were finding a piece of something in each episode, or they were supposed to be.
Yeah, the crystal.
Yeah, that was, I planned that out in advance, and then I actually quit the show. I was being a dick. It was really stupid of me. I just, you know, it was like this thing was huge. Everybody knew, you know, everybody involved with it knew it was huge. And I was kind of like, you know, I would like to be treated like I actually had something to do with making this huge, because I did. And I got my nose in the air and I walked off, and I really wish I hadn't. It was dumb of me. Now, I wound up coming back, so it was fine. I wasn't really mad at anybody. I have a certain style, and the new producer, who was Walt Kubiak, did not have my style. And he kind of, at the beginning, kind of rubbed me the wrong way. It's not a criticism, Walt. I worked with him a lot. I really came to like him, but his initial
interactions.
Yeah, and I was probably being, frankly, you know, kind of giving him the high hat, as they used to say. I said, you know what? I think I did the story outline for the first 1 or 2 or a couple of them of the next 8, and I went, yeah, you know, I just don't want to do this. So they got Jack Mendelson, who wound up story editing me a lot, and Jack, when they went to a full 65 after the first 13, he called me up and was like, you got to write for this thing. And I was like, sure, that's fine. And I wound up writing dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of episodes for Jack before I finally said, you know what, I'm a little tired of this. I did create this. I want to be story editor again. And when I went to CBS, I became story editor again. We actually co-story edited it, because at first they were doing an hour. And Fred liked the idea of dividing the labor, and basically, I don't know if you noticed this was their intention on the CBS shows, but the first half hour, the first episode, because they were doing 2 a week, was always much more action adventure oriented. And the second episode was more comedy oriented, because Jack was really a comedy guy. He could do action adventure, but he was a really good comedy guy. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
He's got really, his comedy, I mean, he went back to Panic, and he worked for EC Comics, and he was one of the writers of Yellow Submarine. Pretty much anything that made you laugh in Yellow Submarine was Jack Mendelson. So we wound up splitting the chores on the CBS ones, and then it went to half an hour, and I said, I just don't want to be story edited anymore. It's either I do the whole show or forget it. And they gave me the whole show, which was nice. So it all came full circle and worked out. On terms of the working stuff out, the main thing, I mean, occasionally they do, like we want to bring back The Fly. We want to bring back Baxter Stockman, do a Baxter Stockman story. Okay. Or the toy company has this character in the toy line, do a story that involves him. I just saw, for the first time in a long time, The Planet of the Turtleoids, which was the 1 hour prime time Although it's funny, it's like I was looking at it, I was going, wow, they actually cut a lot of stuff out of the script that made this story make sense. I mean, the first thing was, there's this big scene where the first attack comes from Herman the Horrible or whatever it is, and all these turtles just like hit the floor and pull in their heads and feet, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are like, what are you guys doing? You have an enemy. You're supposed to fight him. And they're going, what do you think we're doing? We're turtles. This is what we do when we're attacked. And so the whole idea was they can't defend themselves, and it was very vividly established by this one scene, which they didn't use in the final version. But at any rate, I was looking at it and I was noticing that Chrome Dome, I mean, you can see that Chrome Dome is totally wedged into that story because you could have just plucked him out of the story and it would have made it, and just substituted generic, enemy here or Bebop and Rocksteady or whatever, because it was a toy that they had going. It was kind of cool looking.
Now, do you have a favorite episode that you worked on?
Well, I certainly like the first 5. I really like the Neutrinos episode not because I thought it was so brilliant or anything, but when I saw the 5, when they aired, Fred Wolf called me up and he said, I bet you can't tell which episode was animated in Korea, because at that time they were working with Toei, Marvel was working with Toei, and Toei did okay animation, and in Japan they did really good animation for the domestic market, but they always used like a B team or a C team for the American stuff. And then if you couldn't get Toei, you went to a Korean outfit, and their work was considered to be Drek. So he said, I bet you can't tell which episode was animated in Korea. I said, the Mousers episode. He went, you're right. So I bet you can't tell which episode was animated by the Toei A-Team. And I said, that would be the Neutrinos episode. He went, you're right. Neutrinos episode has some of the best animation of anything. It was a Toei A-Team. It wasn't even their usual B-Team. It was the A-Team that does stuff for Japan. Mr. T. We're talking Mr. T. And anyway, you look at that show when they attack the Clown Time food and games with the eyeball missiles, which, by the way, is based on Circus Liquors in Burbank. It's actually based on a real place called Circus Liquor. And it's got a big clown neon clown. It's in tons of movies. It's in Blue Thunder, and it's in all sorts of movies. I don't know if it's still around, but that animation is terrific. And when April is like driving the turtle van right afterwards, and she's popping the side wheelies like that, the animation is fantastic. And I later discovered that was actually directed by, oh Lord, I'm not going to be able to remember his name now, but he was the director of all but the first season of Sailor Moon. He used to live out here. We went and had dinner, and he was like, and I was talking about this episode. He goes, yeah, and he's heating it up. I'm going, dude, what's the deal? And he goes, I directed it. I was like, you directed that? That was awesome. So, strictly on terms of animation, that's my favorite episode. If I had a favorite episode, I really like Corporate Raiders from Dimension X. I like the Casey Jones episodes because he was just such a kick in the pants. I love the line at the end of the first one where it's like, dude, you are truly gone, and he's gone. And he was a strange one. What does he say? He was angry, bizarre, violently psychotic, and Raphael goes, yeah, I liked him too. So, but other than that, I would just say in general the first 5 parters, just because that was that was the most me. That was really the most me of any of those episodes.
Did you have any episodes that was like an episode you did not like writing or did not like how it turned out? And if so, which one was the episode you...
I've probably blanked that. There's not one. I mean, there are ones that I wasn't crazy about, but... And then a word drifted in front of my eyes, and that word was Carter. Carter was something the network insisted on. By the way, a bit below Carter, but still kind of on my crap scale, would be Zach, who I used exactly once because Jack Mendelson made me use him. Carter was a creation of the network. I have no idea why they wanted him. They were trying to freshen up the show. It was slipping in the ratings. You have no idea how hard I fought to reduce the role Carter had in these things. And finally, as it was 8 episodes or something like that, finally by about the 7th episode, I went, I freaking give up. And I think that's when I did Carter the Enforcer, where I actually put his name in the title of a show. He was okay, but he was in the wrong show. He actually could be an interesting character, but he was in the wrong show. But then at that point, the network was kind of going... The network did, like, one really good thing, I thought, and one really bad thing. The really good thing was they said, make the shows darker, more action-y. We're getting our asses kicked by the X-Men. And honestly, even though I'm the guy who brought humor to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I always thought that we overdid it with the humor. So when they started asking for harder edge shows, I was good with that because I thought we needed to go in that direction and still be funny, but there's still the Turtles. They still wear stupid masks. But at the same time, they also said we want the Turtles fighting. Well, they didn't actually say this like a mandate, but they always wanted the Turtles fighting. And I was like, guys, this isn't the Turtles. They're brothers. They're a band of brothers. They're the only 4 creatures like this in the world. All they have is each other and Splinter. They just, and to me it was inconceivable. They might have an argument now and then. They might even have a falling out now and then. But the network was not happy unless these guys were bickering. There was one episode called Turtle Trek where they pretty much are bickering all the way through the episode. And I was like, oh, God, please. So it ruined... And then throw in Carter. So it ruined kind of the chance to really do the show I wanted to do because of network interference. Because the show I really wanted to do was not actually that far from the first 5 parts. I still think the first 5-parter is really good.
Yeah.
And there's real drama in the first 5-parter, which there never was after that. There is one moment of tremendous drama in the 5-parter at pretty much the climax. Do you remember what it was? Do you remember? It's where the Splinter has to destroy the thing that can restore his humanity to save the Turtles. That's real solid drama.
That was really good stuff right there.
Yeah, and I knew I was building up to that point the whole time. The whole thing of changing the origin, aside from the fact that it just didn't make sense to me the way it was laid out in the comic, but the whole idea was build up to that one moment where Splinter makes his sacrifice, because I love a hero who does the right thing even though it costs him. Yeah. Even though he suffers a loss. That's what Seven Samurai is. There's only 2, 3 of them at the end, And in the last line of the film, one of the survivors says, they're looking at the graves of the other one, and he says, well, we won. And the leader says, no, we've lost. Again. And then they go out on that. Yeah. I mean, that's real. So we could have really been doing that in the last couple of CBS seasons, but we had to have Carter, and they just and the reason they want and Dreg was the least of the problem. Look, Shredder was getting stale. There's no question. It's just Dreg was not a great replacement. Dreg wasn't my idea. Yeah. What happened? Do you know how this happened?
No.
Well, it's not a very interesting story, but I'll tell you anyway. I will tell you the quick version. CBS was convinced that the problem with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was me. Because that was the only thing they could do anything about. That you could take the lead writer off the show. I was the writer. I was writing all the episodes. You could take him off. So they went, David Wise is the problem. We don't want him doing the show anymore. Which I was fine with. I was like, God, I've been doing this for 8 years. It's fine. God bless. And they brought in another writer. And he, I believe, did the development on Dreg. Somebody did. Because, first of all, I never would have named a villain Dreg. That's what's at the bottom of a former glass of beer. So, I'm off living my little life, and I'm in Dallas visiting some relatives. I get a call from Walt Coop. I think it was Walt Coop, or maybe it was Fred. It actually might have been. It was like Fred or Bill or Walt or, one of those zany guys. And he says, we got a problem. I said, what's the problem? He said, well, we got the first couple of scripts from the new writer. I said, yeah. And they're terrible. And I will tell you that when this writer, who shall remain nameless, took over the show, the first thing he did was call me. He said, hi, I'm blah, blah, blah. I'm doing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And he's a good guy. He's a fine writer. But Turtles is a hard show to write for. And I said, good, congratulations. He says, I got to ask you one question. And I said, okay, what? He said, how do you write this show? You got to have the comedy and the action there. And I was just like, dude, I don't know. I've been doing it for 8 years. It comes very natural to me. But I mean, I gave him some tips and he went on his way. And then cut to some weeks later, I'm in Dallas. It's 5 p.m. The studio calls and says, we got these scripts in, they're terrible. We've told Judy Price you have to come back. And I was like, okay, thank you. You should probably consult with me before making those offers. But and this shows how crazy the network was at the time, and they were seriously, they needed their medication adjusted. They said, we want you to take the first script and rewrite it and fix it. And I said, okay, when do you need it by? Tomorrow. And I was like, okay, then what's going to happen? I said, well, we're going to send it to Judy, and if she's okay with it, you're back on the show. And honestly, part of me was going, why do I want to do this? Why do I want to do this? So I asked, how much are you going to pay me to do this? And he told me, and I went, okay, that's a motivation. So, because I had them over a bit of a barrel. But anyway, so, I mean, I literally stayed up all night in a Radisson hotel room off the main highway in the middle of Dallas, writing this stupid thing. And I guess I faxed it. I think Fred was very computer averse and internet averse for many, many years. It took a while for him to get computerized. And so the next few days later, I heard back from them, and I said, what happened? I said, well, Judy Price read it. She was the head of CBS, children's programming. And I said, what'd she say? She asked if it was really you, or had you gotten somebody else to write it and put your name on it. And I was like, okay, I've written like 100 of these things, and Judy Price thinks I don't know how to write for it. Is she effing insane? And they went, relax. And I said, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it under this mandate. I said, what? I said, I don't want to speak to CBS. Everything has to come through Walt or Bill or whoever it was. I said, I absolutely will not talk to them. And they went, okay. So that last season, the Dreg season, I didn't really have to deal with the network, except of course I did, because, and I don't even remember that season. I haven't rewatched those shows. It was not fun. So we're getting back to your original question.
Yeah.
It was like really the last 2 years. It was like I was just doing it for the paycheck. But I'll give you a hot news flash. I was always doing it for the paycheck.
Do you have any of the other Ninja Turtle merchandise?
I have pretty much everything. I don't have everything, but I have the Toon Turtles and the original action figures, and I don't have the. Did they do a Technodrome? Actually, I might have a Technodrome.
Yeah, they do have a Technodrome.
I might have a Technodrome in a box somewhere. I haven't looked lately. It's not like I actually ever take these toys out and play with them. But I have a bunch, and I had to buy them pretty much all myself, except for the first wave of toys, because my friend Harlan Ellison, who we mentioned earlier, loved the first 5-parters. He was over the moon about it. It really got good reviews. Did you ever see the review in People magazine? No. Back when they weren't like a tabloid, but actually a magazine about interesting people. The reviewer said, all kids shows should be this hip, witty, and playful. All adult shows should be this hip, witty, and playful. And I thought, wow, nice. Anyway, Harlan was a huge fan of the show, and he called up Playmates and said, and he called me up, and he actually called me up to tell me how much he liked it. I was really flattered. And he said, so have they sent you the toys? And I went, no. He said, they should send you the toys. I said, they never send us the toys. We never get comped on anything. He said, oh. And he called up Playmate. And a few days later, a box of toys showed up. So I got the very first wave.
Is there anything you would like to say to the Turtle fans of the original cartoon series who sees this?
I'm glad you liked it. We really, nobody knew it was going to be. Like I said, I thought this is either going to be huge, or the thing they point to when they say the word disaster, and that it touched so many people and was such a big phenomenon, and still is continuing on this day is very gratifying. And I hope y'all turned out all right watching all those cartoons. I hope you studied, and I hope you stayed off drugs and respected your parents and said your prayers at night, and go on and lead useful lives as citizens of the world.
We'll catch you guys next time on Cowabunga Corner.